When you play the Game of Thrones,
subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Reread channel. And today's video, we're going to be doing Tyrion 5, A Clash of Kings. This chapter continues on the Tyrion plotline. We get a lot of Tyrion early on in this story. We're only about 230, 40-ish pages into my bigger version of the book, and we're already 5 chapters in. And so this chapter is going to continue on that plot as Tyrion discovers kind of the pyromancers and what they've been up to with Cersei. We're getting this peace proposal by Robb Stark at the very beginning of the book in Catelyn's first chapter, someone we have not seen much of at all in this book, in which we will see it in a couple of chapters. But this chapter then goes from that part of it, goes to Tyrion and Cersei having a confrontation as the news about Myrcella going to Dorne has finally leaked to Cersei, as Pycelle seems to be the rat. So that is what to expect from this chapter, and let's get into the chapter. As we start on page 232, Tyrion Lannister was warned to dress warmly and took the advice seriously. He took his oversized shadow skin cloak that he had gotten back in Book 1 from the Mountains of the Moon. He also wore kilted breeches, a woolen doublet, and he just is heavily dressed, which is quite interesting given the fact we haven't gotten to winter yet. It's not all that cold outside. Kind of sets an interesting tone for the chapter. The cloak was too long for him, so he had to wrap it around himself several times, making him look like a ball of striped fur. What I find hilarious is I actually have a coat that's way too big for me. It's my winter coat, but it's kind of similar. Like, it kind of makes me look like I'm kind of like an Eskimo or like I live in Alaska type situation. Put it this way, it's like a 2XL and I wear like a medium. So I kind of relate to how Tyrion feels here, having a coat that's just way bigger than you are. The underground vault was bitterly cold and damp, with streaked stone walls. Timett, unable to endure the chill, retreated back up to the cellar. It really tell you how cold it actually is down here. If you think about Timett, he's been living in the mountains, in the Vale. The Vale is a fairly cold place. Their winters are quite brutal. So I think that's very interesting, just to kind of build up the scope of where Tyrion really is. The vault was located beneath Rhaenys' hill, behind the guild hall of the alchemists. The only source of light was an iron and glass oil lamp carried carefully by Hallen the pyromancer. Tyrion inspected the wildfire stored in round, ruddy clay jars known as ginger jars. The jars were fragile, and he was warned not to grip them too tightly. Again, not only are we having this drastic cold mixing with the fire of the wildfire, kind of nice little parallel to the A Song of Ice and Fire actual story. A lot of people thinking that's going to be kind of like Jon with his Stark background within Daenerys with her Fire Targaryen background, kind of mixing. Or you could look at Jon as possibly being a Stark and a Targaryen, having both of those within him. But either way, it's an interesting, like, contrasting issue with the wildfire and then this cold environment, trying to, again, keep these jars from burning down the entire city. The surface of the jars was roughened to prevent slipping. Again, if something's very slick, it's going to be easier to drop. A lot of people love to have phone like cases and things like that because it'll help with that. It'll make it a lot harder to actually drop it because it's not as slick as like an actual phone is. I am one of those people that I trust my hands enough to where I don't really feel like I need a case, so I don't have one, but it's kind of the same like concept. Tilting a jar to look inside, Tyrion noted that the wildfire oozed slowly toward the lip. In the poor light, he could not confirm its murky green color, but observed its thickness. As we get into page 233, Hallen explained that the wildfire's thickness was due to the cold and would flow more easily when warmed. Again, just showing the cold trying to keep this wildfire from getting out of control. He wore black and scarlet robes trimmed with sable through the fur, though the fur was patchy and moth-eaten. It shows a kind of a contrast here. One, the pyromancers definitely were more powerful during the time of the Targaryens, who were infatuated by fire, and you can even note that in their robes, right? Having the colors of House Targaryen. But even though that might actually kind of be the case, you can tell, though, they're still quite poor, right? Moth-eaten and fur that was patchy shows kind of that contrast. The pyromancers referred to wildfire as their substance and addressed each other as wisdom, which Tyrion found irritating. Yeah, the pyromancers are a lot of ways like the maesters, right? Where they're very, I would almost say egotistical about their order. I don't mean all maesters, but it kind of gives you that same kind of feeling. And Even Tyrion, he like kind of talks about that or thinks about that, like how Tyrion even thinks about it. The alchemists had largely been replaced by the maesters. He's kind of thinking about that, and it's interesting. You think about the similarities between the two organizations. Alan confirmed that the water could not extinguish wildfire, and that would seep into cloth, wood, leather, and even steel, setting them ablaze. It goes through everything. And again, it's more of that foreshadowing to what we're going to see with the Battle of the Blackwater, but very important that this substance, this is not a normal fire. This is not something that can easily be, put down with a bucket of water. You know how they would kind of try to put out fires anyway during medieval times. Not like that whatsoever. Tyrion recalled Thoros of Myr's flaming sword, which had to be replaced after each melee due to wildfire's intense burning properties. It's great for a show, not great practically. Something we also saw with Stannis' sword, Lightbringer, quote unquote, in the beginning of the story. He questioned why the substance did not seep into the clay jars, to which Hallen revealed that it did over time. Again, showing how it even is going to get through its container specifically designed to stop it from spreading. An older vault beneath their current one stored wildfire jars from King Aerys's reign, some shaped like fruits, which had become even more unstable with age. Of course, someone like Aerys, who is, going to love this substance because he loves fire and he kind of went crazy towards the end of his life, is going to make this extremely dangerous substance a fruit. Just kind of very fitting for the Mad King. To contain the danger, they had sealed the jars with wax and flooded the lower vault with water, though Hallen admitted they should have been destroyed. Interesting, right? Showing that as this wildfire ages, it's almost like how people view wine, where like it gets better as it's aged. Kind of the same thing with wildfire. It gets more dangerous as it ages. Very interesting concept. Many of their masters were killed during the sack of King's Landing, which we know comes from Jaime. We'll kind of figure out more about that into A Storm of Swords. But for now, it's very important to understand that the sack of King's Landing left this order in a really weird position where a lot of them probably don't know where all of their wildfire caches had been placed, and they're only just now recovering some, as Hallen's going to tell Tyrion. And that's a very dangerous concept, because if these are just lying around and they're not being, attended to, easily one of these caches could blow up at any time. Where the stuff in season 6 kind of came from, where you have this idea of wildfire caches being all over the city that people don't know about. And the example that's given that there were 200 jars found beneath the Great Sept of Baelor only recently in A Clash of Kings kind of reinforces where that idea seemed to come from. But it's something to keep in your mind given Cersei, who's a character that, again, a lot of parallels to Aerys. She burns the Tower of the Hand, and she seems to really revel in it, watching the flames. It gives her a lot of pleasure. And it's something that would reflect on someone like Aerys. And so with the religious issue coming about and Cersei feeling backed into a corner, could she, use the pyromancers and what they've already had been planning with Aerys? Very possible. Hallen personally oversaw the careful removal of those jars, transporting them by night in a sand-filled cart with the guild's most skilled acolytes. Tyrion surveyed the countless rows of wildfire jars and inquired if Aerys' old stock was still usable. Now, a couple things that I think is interesting. You think about the concept of having to transport these in darkness and putting them in sand-filled carts. It kind of shows you how in-depth these pyromancers are in terms of trying to preserve their craft and things like that. But also, could you imagine if the crowd, who already, again, it's not made clear exactly when these jars were found, but could you think about this idea that, you're in the city and, Renly is coming or Stannis is coming and the war has completely destroyed the country, you're starving, and you see some wildfire jars being removed from underneath the Sept of Baelor? Like, this is a massive PR scandal. This is a massive scandal of the Lannister regime if this is discovered. And so it kind of gets swept under the rug here, but if this had been, pointed out, boy, they could have been in a really bad spot. Hallen assured them they could still be used, but only with the utmost caution. Again, they get more dangerous as they're aged, more unpredictable, so really need to take a lot of care. But that gets us into page 234. Hallen explained that as wildfire ages, it becomes increasingly volatile, igniting from any flame, spark, or excessive heat, even to the point of if they're left out in sunlight for too long. That is crazy. And the thing is, once that fire started, there's no stopping it. It's going to just keep going. And that's what makes things so difficult when using wildfire. You think about, Brendan Rivers, he's going to use this on trying to destroy some corpses because of the spring sickness that you kind of hear about in the second Duncan Egg novella. This is kind of the issue. It's like, yeah, it can be useful, but if it keeps spreading, it could take down the entire city. Tyrion asked how many jars they currently had, and Hallen reported a total of 7,840, including 4,000 from King Aerys's reign. That is a crazy amount of wildfire. If that wildfire was to, explode right now, that could level the entire city almost. Like, that is a crazy thing to think about. Hallen confidently stated that they would reach the promised 10,000 jars, as Wisdom Mallard had predicted, which is interesting because you think about this and you're going, okay, why are you having wildfire be made, right? And Tyrion is going to think about how they can even execute this in the battle, right? Trying to get soldiers to be able to man this stuff, but think about the precautions you have to do to use this stuff. And so when you think about, okay, they're going to use this in battle, so many things could go easily wrong. Aegon IV also tried to use kind of wildfire. It didn't go well for him either. And so I really look at this, and this is something that's very dangerous. But I guess when you're in a desperate position like Tyrion and Cersei, it's kind of what you have at your disposal. You use everything you can. Tyrion was both impressed and alarmed, having previously assumed this number was an exaggeration rather than a real possibility. And yes, if they hadn't had that old stock of Aerys's reign, it would have been impossible, but it is quite a lot of wildfire. He cautioned Hallen against haste, emphasizing that defective wildfire or even a single mishap could be disastrous. Agreed. Hallen reassures him that the substance was prepared with extreme care in stone cells, each equipped with a sand-filled chamber above designed to collapse and smother any fire below. Which, again, it's nice to know that at least the pyromancers are taking precautions if something was to happen. And honestly, think about how complex this is and how thought out it is. I would assume that this has probably happened before, that they've had a lot of different accidents that's prepared them for this. Hallen also says that there's basically some sort of spells that they use against the wildfire, which Tyrion suspects is more just like tricks, which I agree with. The pyromancers don't really show any type of skill spell-wise. It seems more like conjurers' tricks or things like that. Hallen insisted that the pyromancers were never careless, emphasizing their deep respect for wildfire. He warned, however, that common soldiers or the crew of a wildfire-equipped Spitfire ship could cause catastrophe in the chaos of battle, which is 100% correct. People that have never seen wildfire, again, think about what Tyrion's going to talk about, or think about what Tyrion's going to think about later on in this chapter when he goes back to talk to Jacqueline at the gates, is that there's a lot of men coming into the Gold Cloaks right now because they don't have food and they just need something to survive, and so they join the Gold Cloaks. These men have never seen wildfire. They've never handled it. In the heat of battle, you don't know how men are going to react. Are they going to flee from the battle? Are they going to get nervous, extremely nervous, and not perform? They'll drop a bottle of this wildfire, and then bam, okay, now a part of your wall is on fire, killing more men than it maybe even would have killed if you'd had it put in the Spitfire. It's something that's very risky. It can go really well for you if you use it, but it can also go extremely poorly. Hallen noted that his father had once warned King Aerys, just as his grandfather had warned King Jaehaerys about the dangers of mishandling wildfire. And that gets us into page 235. Tyrion sarcastically remarked that if King Aerys had burned down the city, someone would have informed him. Now, it's interesting that he notes that, given the fact that that's exactly what Aerys was more or less planning to do, but failed because of his brother. Hallen reiterated the warning, advising Tyrion to be very, very careful with wildfire. Tyrion inquired about the availability of empty clay jars, ensuring there was an ample supply. What I think is interesting as well, the reason I think that the pyromancers would be so worried about, them being careful is because not only, do they want their product to be used well, they are very prideful about their work, it also reflects upon them, right? If wildfire is seen as something that is more harmful to the user than what you're trying to use it for, people are going to stop buying your wildfire. They're going to stop paying for your services, and you go even more into desperation, and your organization declines overall. So There is a lot of investment here for this to go right with Hallen. Tyrion continues requesting a few thousand empty jars to be sent to the captains at each city gate, careful not to interfere with wildfire production. Hallen, confused, asked why Tyrion needed empty pots, but Tyrion only gave a knowing smile, implying his strategic intentions. Which is, again, important to understand here. Tyrion is not stupid. If he's going to use this wildfire ploy, which seems like one of the only things he has going for him, he wants his men to be somewhat prepared, right? To have at least used it. Now, is it different going from an empty jar or a jar with another type of substance like oil to wildfire? Yes. Wildfire is the difference between your entire squad of men dying and not, right? So it's a bit different, but you got to respect that Tyrion's trying to at least prepare his men. Declaring he had seen enough, Tyrion requested to be escorted back to his litter. Hallen eagerly agreed, expressing that it had been an honor to receive the hand of the king, as no hand had visited since Lord Rosart in King Aerys's reign. People don't like the pyromancers, especially after what they helped do for Aerys. Robert's not coming there. Jon, Aaron, Ned, they're not coming there. So you can kind of see where that trickle effect has led to where they are, again, not that powerful of an organization anymore. Tyrion recalled that Aerys had used the pyromancers to burn his enemies alive, as Jaime had once told him. But it seems that Jaime had not told him the full story about everything that happened with the pyromancers. Hallen mentioned that he had spoken to Cersei about arranging a royal visit for King Joffrey to the Alchemist's Guild, hoping for a grand feast. Hoping, really, this is what Hallen wants, is to get their organization back to being a very prominent organization. Tyrion politely shuts down the idea, reminding Hallen that Joffrey had prohibited feasting until the war was won, at Tyrion's own insistence. Tyrion is trying to make it where, we're not feasting in front of all the small folk who can't eat at all, right? And the issue is you're having so many different people coming to the gates looking for food. Tyrion's going to think about that, in terms of what we saw through Sansa's last chapter. It's a very desperate situation, and there's no time for feasting, and it's not really appropriate either. Halland, ever still desperate, then suggested visiting the Red Keep instead, offering to entertain Joffrey with a small demonstration of the pyromancer's powers. Tyrion, wary of Joffrey's cruelty and love for death, promised to bring it up with Cersei, which is his own way of just saying no, but politely, though he secretly had no intention of letting Joffrey experiment with burning people alive. Could you imagine Joffrey with pyromancers? That would be the worst possible thing. We would see the Mad King once again, or maybe Aryan Brightflame, which, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if Joffrey, took himself out. That would really help a lot of the realm at this point, and especially the people ruling, but who knows? But Joffrey doesn't have dragon dreams and things like that, so who knows on that part of it. Getting into page 236, Tyrion and Hallen reached the top of the steps, where Tyrion removed his shadow skin cloak and folded it over his arm. The guild hall of the alchemist was a maze of black stone, but Hallen led him through its corridors to the gallery of the iron torches, which is super cool. Having these 20-foot tall black metal columns with polished black marble walls and floors, and these torches that again have this green fire. It's so cool. Kind of reminds me of, if you guys have played Sea of Thieves, how you can change the color of the lanterns. It reminds me of that with this really cool room that's described here. So you say what you want about the pyromancers, but they got a pretty cool looking, base of operations. Tyrion knew the spectacle was staged for his visit, and the torches would be extinguished as soon as he left, given wildfire's cost, which is completely true. Maybe back in, Aerys's day, right, this would have looked way more grand. They would have been able to actually keep the torches lit and things like that, but not at this point of where the pyromancers are. They exited onto the Street of the Sisters near Visenya's Hill, where Tyrion bid Hallen farewell. Timett, son of Timett, awaited him with an escort of burned men, their scarred faces useful for intimidating the city's restless population. So there's two things here. One, yes, it does do that, right? It kind of forces people to, submit and all that stuff, but it also doesn't give Tyrion a good It also doesn't give Tyrion a great reputation given his company, right? And that's something that's going to be a big part of book 3 is his reputation. This is something that's going to add into why people don't like him all that much. Plus, he looks different than everyone else. So that's going to really be a big part of it. Also, what I do think is interesting is, Tyrion makes a note that he kind of brought the burned men almost in an irony because of the wildfire, which is just kind of a crazy thought there from Tyrion, but we move. But moving on, the city remained on edge. 3 nights prior, a mob had gathered at the Red Keep's gates demanding food. The same mob we had seen in Sansa's chapter when she escapes. But Joffrey had ordered arrows fired into the crowd, killing 4, and then mockingly told them to eat their own dead. Joffrey definitely gets the award for worst leader of all time. Could you imagine these people, they come to the gates just wanting food, anything like that, and the response that they're given is your king shoots arrows at you and then tells you to probably eat your loved ones or people you know. Not a recipe for success. But it also kind of shows that double standard, whereas later on, people will come to love Joffrey, and a lot of that's because of Marjorie and the Tyrells, but they won't hate Joffrey, whereas they'll hate Tyrion, even though Tyrion in a lot of ways is trying to help them. It's that double standard that really is going to play into kind of Tyrion's breakdown mentally as the books kind of go on. Bronn unexpectedly awaited Tyrion by the litter, explaining that he was delivering messages. One from Sir Jacqueline Bywater urgently requesting Tyrion's presence at the Gate of the Gods, though he hadn't disclosed the reason, but he knew it must be urgent. Tyrion had also been summoned to Maegor's Holdfast by Cersei, the message delivered by their cousin, Sir Lancel Lannister. Very weird. Why is Lancel delivering Cersei's messages? Why is he so close to her? All those things will be playing in Tyrion's mind, and something that we'll see come to head later on. Bronn mocked Lancel's attempt at manhood, noting his 4 lip hairs and recent knighthood. Bronn, kind of a savage. I think that for anyone that's a guy at least, you can remember maybe your first time trying to grow a beard or facial hair, whatever, if you can anyway. I know this was never an issue for me. I could grow facial hair very easily. I fought against it for a very long time, and then eventually I just let it go. I was one of those kids that easily could have had facial hair when I was 16. I just 15, 16, and I just chose not to. I always kept it clean shaven. But as you guys can see, not the same. If you even go back to Game of Thrones, my rereading there that's been uploaded to the channel each day, very different facial hair from the very beginning to now. So, just an interesting little note here. Tyrion acknowledged Lancel's new title, but prioritized Bywater's summons over Cersei's. Bywater's is actually probably a legit concern of the safety and defense of the city, whereas Cersei's could be over anything, even though Tyrion's probably suspecting the leakage of who's going to be sent where from the last chapter probably is coming to a head. And so making Cersei wait is probably for the best. He ordered Bronn to inform Cersei that he would see her after returning from the gate. Bronn warned that she wouldn't like the delay, but Tyrion welcomed her frustration, preferring Cersei angry and stupid over composed and cunning, which is true. Would you rather face a Cersei like in Game of Thrones with Ned, where she's more composed, more cunning, or would you rather see her here, where she's not thinking rationally? Tyrion tossed his coat into the litter, and Timett helped him climb in. As we get into page 237. Tyrion arrived at the Gate of the Gods, where the market square, normally bustling with farmers, was nearly deserted. There's nobody coming to the market square because there's no food to get. People don't have the money to pay for bread or pay for, crops or whatever, because there's nothing coming into the city to begin with. Sir Jacqueline Bywater greeted him with a salute and informed him that Sir Cleos Frey had arrived from Riverrun under a peace banner carrying a letter from Robb Stark. And this is big news if you're Tyrion. If you're Tyrion, even if this is a bad peace proposal, it's a start, right? They can try and forestall the Stark threat while they deal with Renly and Stannis. Cleos confirmed the letter contained peace terms, and Tyrion requested to see him. The letter and also to have more counsel and to talk with Cleos. The gold cloaks had confined Sir Cleos in a windowless guard room where he rose to greet Tyrion. Cleos had confirmed that the letter contained peace terms, and Tyrion requested to see Cleos, who at the moment was being kept in a windowless guard room where he rose to meet Tyrion. Cleos asked if Cersei was present, but Tyrion told him she was otherwise occupied. Tyrion is taking the power, he's taking the information flow into his own hands so that he can deal with that and use it against Cersei. Tyrion took Robb's letter and dismissed Sir Jacqueline, keeping the conversation private. Cleos insisted the offer was meant for the Queen Regent, but Tyrion assured him he would handle it. Tyrion noted that Cleos looked gaunt and haggard, and Cleos admitted conditions in the Riverlands were dire. Again, we've seen all this through Arya's eyes, but you can imagine. I mean, think about someone like Cleos, who had a pretty good group of people he was being transported with, and even they came under attack. Cleos notes the Riverlords are burning their own crops to starve the Lannisters, while Tywin's foragers were torching villages and slaughtering the small folk. Cleos recounted how his group had been attacked twice, losing 3 men and suffering multiple wounded. The attackers were unaffiliated sellswords or deserters fighting for their own survival. It is just people trying to survive, right? And that leads men to do awful things, something that's going to be a huge focus of A Feast for Crows, but it's made clear here. Arya, it's lucky that she's even made it as far as she has. Tyrion reviewed Robb Stark's peace terms, finding them quite excessive, and you have to see this from the Lannister perspective, right? Even though we talked about this from Robb's side, these conditions just were not going to be accepted. It's a good start, I think, from Robb, but none of this is going to be accepted. Because in a lot of ways, Robb is not giving anything back, right? Robb is doing this peace from a position of they're winning the war, right? And so when you think about what the terms are, half the realm, wanting the North and the Riverlands to become free, the release of captives, hostages, getting Ned's sword back ice, his sisters being released, a lot of it, that all could not happen at this point. Cleos reported that Robb remained at Riverrun, seemingly hesitant to face Tywin Lannister in battle. The Riverlords had abandoned him, returning to defend their own lands, which suggested his strength was weakening, which is correct, right? The longer that Robb stays put, the worse the war gets for him. And I think it's interesting because, the way Cleos phrases it, Robb doesn't want to meet Tywin, it's more that Robb doesn't have the manpower to assault Harrenhal. If Tywin and Robb were to meet on maybe an open, even field, maybe that'd be a different story, but you can't really assault Harrenhal with Robb's numbers and the situation right now going on. Tyrion had wondered if this was part of Tywin's strategy before rolling up Stark's map, declaring that the terms were unacceptable, which was the truth. And getting more into Tywin's plan, that is Tywin's plan right now. Tywin's plan is he's going to react to the situation going on. Let Robb make the first mistake. Or if Robb is fine to just sit there and in the Riverlands, maybe he can help deal with the Baratheons, right? And so there's just a lot of unknowns right now where Tywin has positioned himself in a very central position to deal with those threats. And hey, if Robb does come and siege Harrenhal, all the better for the Lannisters. The Lannisters can withhold that siege and would have an advantage. Robb does not have the dragons, and Harrenhal is still a very defensible castle. Getting into page 238, Sir Cleos Frey pleaded with Tyrion to at least trade Sansa and Arya for Tyon and Willem Frey. It would exchange captives, but it's just not of an equal level, right? You can't do that trade, and Tyrion knows it. Tyrion refused but offered to propose an alternative exchange after consulting Cersei and the small council. Cleos discouraged and warned that Robb would not yield easily, as it was Lady Catelyn, not Robb, who truly wanted peace, which is true. Catelyn's the one that pushed for this letter. Robb didn't really want peace whatsoever, but he was pushed into it, and that's why the terms are not great in terms of actually making a peace. And so you come to that moment, and Tyrion's going to see that, I'm dealing with Catelyn. I need to maybe deal with Catelyn, and that can help maybe get something done. Tyrion acknowledged that Catelyn's main concern was recovering her daughters and dismissed Cleos to rest, promising to summon him once terms were decided. Tyrion found Sir Jaqen Bywater on the ramparts, observing new City Watch recruits drilling below. With many refugees in King's Landing, recruits were plentiful, like I talked about. More people coming into the city, they want to find jobs, they want to be able to feed their families and get decent meals. Joining the Gold Cloaks is not such a bad option. But Tyrion doubted that any of them really had any ability to fight effectively, let alone handle wildfire and things like that. Tyrion commended Bywater for calling him and ordered Cleos to be treated with hospitality, ensuring he remained under watch. He instructed Bywater to provide food, clean clothing, and medical aid to Cleos' escort, but did not allow them to be brought into the city. He didn't want the Starks to know their true peril, right? They're not being fed. They're being blockaded, basically. They are struggling, right? They are on the brink of almost a riot in the city. If that was to go back to the Starks might be going, huh, yeah, like why should we offer better peace terms? You're on the brink of collapse. So that's a big part of it, right? You don't want to show your strength to the other side. Tyrion then relayed orders regarding the clay pots from the Alchemists Guild, which Bywater says is, very smart to do to try and train them, but again, when war and battle starts going, who knows what could really happen. Tyrion continues saying that the men will start with green painted filled pots for practice in loading and firing. Those who spilled or fumbled would be replaced, and successful trainees would advance to lamp oil, practicing lighting and firing while aflame. It's a great plan, but it's going to be very tough to execute. Only after mastering these steps would they be allowed to handle wildfire. Bywater was not a big fan of this wildfire, but he agrees that it was wise to do these training measures. And Tyrion even agrees with him, but it's what he has available. When you have less men than your opponent, when you have less trained men, you need those wild cards to make things equal out a bit. Once again inside his litter, Tyrion settled in, knowing Cersei would be furious about him intercepting Stark's letter, but his father had sent him to rule, not to please his sister. And that is the truth, right? Tyrion is trying to rule and keep King's Landing from falling, and that doesn't always align with trying to please Cersei, and most of the time it doesn't at all. Which gets us into page 239. Tyrion saw Robb Stark's peace proposal as an opportunity to stall and mislead him while the Lannisters built their strength. Again, like we've talked about for Robb Stark in the past, and even in this chapter, the longer that nothing happens, the less and less likely the war is going to go well. Again, for the Starks and the Tullys, you want this war to end as quickly as possible, right? In terms of being able to generate backup troops and things like that, the longer the war goes on, if it goes more and more to the Lannister side. They have the money to refresh their soldiers. They have more, population. They can get more men to refill the ones that you beat. And so, again, stalling and things like that is a great tactic that both Tyrion and Tywin use. He unfortunately planned to send Sir Cleos Frey back and forth, which eventually would lead to Cleos's death, but it is something that needed to be done, as somebody had to carry all these peace terms. Meanwhile, Sir Stafford Lannister was training a new host at Casterly Rock, preparing for a pincer attack with Tywin to crush the Tullys and Starks. Now, as a reader here, you might not even realize what Robb is going to do, because we've only had one Catelyn chapter through the first third of the book, which is kind of surprising when you really think about it. But Catelyn and the Blackfish kind of discuss exactly what Robb's going to do. He's going to go straight at Sir Stafford Lannister's army in the meantime. But Tyrion, Tywin, they don't know these things, and even the reader on your first read, it's really hard to predict that that's what Robb's going to do, because we really haven't had a lot of information in Robb's camp since the very beginning of the book. But in theory, Tyrion is right. If Sir Stafford is able to get his host over into the Riverlands, Tywin and Stafford could easily destroy Robb. Tyrion worried more about Robert's brothers. They're, for one, much closer, and two, there was no army really preventing them from getting to King's Landing. Renly's slow advance north and the possibility of Stannis sailing up to the Blackwater Rush was constantly on Tyrion's mind, and especially if Renly gets to the city. Renly's army is very, very huge. There's nothing Tyrion could do. Like if Renly comes to the city and there's no aid being sent, they will fall. Now Stannis is different because Stannis is still an unknown. They don't know Stannis' strength at this time. He took some comfort in the large wildfire reserves, but the uncertainty of the war still loomed heavily. His thoughts were interrupted by a commotion in Cobbler's Square, where a crowd had gathered around a ranting prophet. The begging brother, clad in undyed wool and hempen belt, preached about corruption and divine punishment, pointing to the red comet over Aegon's high hill. The preacher denounced Joffrey as the product of incest, calling Tyrion a twisted little monkey demon, which is a fire insult. I'm not going to lie. Maybe this preacher should get into diss tracks, because I think he'd be pretty good at it. But he condemned the High Septon for gluttony while the people starved. He described Robert's death as divine justice, claiming snakes had slithered from his belly, and warned of fire as divine retribution. Again, this is very important because it's the manipulation of the populace. We see this all throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. I wowould say most notably during the Dance of the Dragons. It's going to come up in A Feast for Crows. It's kind of surprising to me how much of this chapter really foreshadows a lot that is to come in A Feast for Crows specifically. with a lot of the major themes in this chapter, but a lot of it is kind of what the people would have been thinking, right? People aren't getting fed. Rare Baratheon is kind of looked at as fondly regarded by the people because of peacetime and the overall, like, I would say, splendid nature of King's Landing, the tournaments and things like that. So I don't think a lot of the small folk would have agreed with this statement, but it's definitely they would have agreed with the condemning of the Lannister regime, right? And so this is very important to, I think, controlling the people of King's Landing. Some in the crowd echoed his cries, but others mocked him, which did reassure Tyrion, right? Tyrion knows that at least not everybody's against him, but there are still people growing into this movement against the Lannisters, something that will boil over in a feast for crows. Tyrion ordered his litter to keep moving as the burned men forced a path through the people. Though insulted, he smirked at the preacher's remark about the High Septon, recalling Moon Boy's joke that the man worshipped the seven so devoutly that he ate a meal for each god whenever he sat at table. The High Septon seems very corrupt, which is not surprising at all. If you go through Fire and Blood, if you go through really just the history of, I would say, the High Septon and the Faith, a lot of corruption, very similar to our own world history. Religion is something that I think can be a very great thing for people, but I think even within religion, you have to understand that a lot of people abuse that power and position, and that's kind of what George is trying to tell with the High Septon. And I think that's always present in A Song of Ice and Fire, the corruption of religion and how that's used to motivate people. Again, not saying religion's bad in the real world or anything like that. I myself am Christian. I am somebody that, I am religious, but I still think that there are things in religion that are not good. So that's all I'll say on that topic. Getting into page 240, Tyrion arrives at the Red Keep, feeling more hopeful than he did earlier in the day, thinking that time is needed to piece things together. If he can just get the chain going, if he can get this wildfire finished, if he can get his men to be trained in how to use the wildfire, Tyrion could be in a much better position. And so I do think that if I was in Tyrion's position, I'd be going, okay, there is at least hope now. There is a chance, but I need some luck. He enters his solar and finds Cersei, who confronts him angrily for ignoring her summons. Cersei asserts her authority over the castle, claiming it's her son's royal residence, as Tyrion had wondered why she was even here. But Tyrion tries to play this cool and diffuse situation, saying he was about to visit her, and their conversation quickly grows tense. It becomes quite clear right away that Cersei is bothered by something, and that something is her daughter. Cersei accuses Tyrion of trying to sell Myrcella, her only daughter, and he responds coolly, mentioning that Myrcella's role as a princess could involve such arrangements. This is what's normal for women in this society. Unfortunately, women do not have the most amount of power or are able to dictate what happens in their lives. Most of the time, the father or the man of the family dictates who a woman will marry. And so Tyrion is right in that way to say, this is what was going to happen anyway. Myrcella was going to be married to somebody. But I think Tyrion takes it a little too far, as he kind of says, oh, what did you plan? That you were going to marry Myrcella to Tommen? Again, in reference to Cersei and Jaime. It's something that I don't know if I would have said here, because Cersei's already so angry. Maybe he's trying to make her more angry and unstable. And Tyrion doesn't fear Cersei at this point. Tyrion believes that he really has all the power. He has all of the men behind him. Cersei really doesn't have much power here. Cersei angrily knocks his wine cup from his hand, threatening Tyrion for his remark. Tyrion suggests Myrcella would be safer in Dorne than in King's Landing, which I do agree with. Even though the Dornish are, big haters of the Lannisters, you have Renly and Stannis coming to knock on your door at any point. They could kill all of you. Cersei dismisses this, saying, again, the Martells do not love them, but Tyrion counters, explaining what I talked about, right? The issues of the War of the Five Kings. But even this, if you think about it, yeah, the Dornish have had issues with the Lannisters, but they've also had a lot more issues with the Stormlanders and the Reach for a far longer amount of time, which is an interesting point for Tyrion to kind of bring up. That is true. But I would also counter that by saying the closer grievance is way more important now than the Reach and the Stormlanders. Yes, if we then skip another generation or two, the Lannisters would definitely be down there in terms of hatred, but it wouldn't be as present as it is now. But he says he proposes a marriage between Myrcella and Trystane Martell when she reaches 14, with Myrcella staying in Dorne until then for protection. Getting in at page 241, Cersei reacts angrily to Tyrion's proposal, calling Myrcella a hostage, while Tyrion insists she would be an honored guest in Dorne. Now, Myrcella is a hostage. Let's not sugarcoat it. She is basically a hostage, just not named that, right? It's kind of like Theon in a way, but just a lot better. Like, it's a lot better of a situation. But yeah, Cersei is right. It is still basically a hostage situation. Tyrion suggests Sir Aerys Oakheart accompany Myrcella, assuring that she would be well guarded with a knight of the Kingsguard. Boy, again, setting up another thing for a Feast for Crows with Myrcella's plot and the Dorne plot, but we know how that all goes. And you can't blame Aerys too much because Arianne is kind of a baddie, so, you can't really predict that, but not going to be the best plan that works out there. Cersei dismisses the idea, worried that Doran Martell might view Myrcella's death as revenge for his sisters. Now, I wouldn't go that far because Doran Martell isn't going to punish a child for the sins of, their grandfather or other people in House Lannister. Tyrion argues that Martell is too honorable to harm Myrcella, and that keeping her would help secure Dorne's alliance with the Lannisters. He also offered Martell significant terms, including the killer of his sister and lands. They're offering the Martells a lot, but in this situation where the Lannisters are losing the war, it would appear, you have to give up a lot to get an ally. Cersei reacts strongly, accusing Tyrion of offering too much without her consent. Tyrion defends his actions, pointing out that offering less would have been seen as an insult, which Tyrion is correct. Cersei mocks him, and Tyrion, angered, retorts with an insult. She then slaps him across the face. This is when Tyrion turns it up a notch, right? He kind of goes into the fear factor. This is kind of those things that would lead maybe Cersei to believe that Tyrion would try and kill Joffrey or something like that. It's kind of here. Tyrion warns her that it'll be the last time she strikes him, but Cersei mocks him, referencing their father's letter as little protection. She references Ned had a letter as well, and that didn't protect him all that well, but Tyrion reflects on this. What does he have to fear? He does have allies and protection by people like Varys, Jaqen Bywater, and Bronn. Now, are they the most trustworthy people? No, but as of right now, it doesn't make sense that they would betray him, and so Cersei's threats kind of ring hollow for now. Tyrion then suggests that if King's Landing falls, Myrcella could be in great danger, which makes Cersei burst into tears. Is this an act by Cersei? Is she being overcome by the emotion of, it's looking more and more like her impending death and the death of her children, even losing her child in Myrcella? This all shocks Tyrion. He hadn't seen Cersei cry since when she had been a child. And so Tyrion doesn't know what to do, right? The two have never had a close relationship, and we do know that Tyrion has this weird relationship with Cersei that we do know that he wants her, like in a really weird way, like sexually, like the way Jaime and Cersei are. And so part of this is weird because Tyrion, has never had to be this kind of brother to Cersei to kind of comfort her, and Cersei's never looked for that from Tyrion. And so Tyrion, I feel like this is just his first thought, attempts to comfort her. He reaches for her shoulder, but she violently rejects his touch, telling him to not look at her in that moment. Cersei is somebody that's not used to being vulnerable. She's someone that tries to show off this presence of always being strong and things like that. And this moment, this very brief moment of seeing her break down, Cersei doesn't want that to be shown in Tyrion, someone that she hates and doesn't like at all. She doesn't want that weakness to be shown to someone like Tyrion. It just reinforces that relationship that Tyrion will never have with Cersei, right? Tyrion turns his back to her, attempting to soothe her, assuring her that nothing will happen to Myrcella. And Tyrion is even more insulted by the reaction he gets from Cersei than her calling him names or slapping him, because it's that realization that Tyrion will never be accepted by his sister, and all of those things. It's a lot darker than that as well, especially as we get deeper into Tyrion's psychology with Cersei, but just something to kind of remember. Cersei calls him a liar, criticizing his promises, especially about freeing Jaime, questioning where he is. Again, it's not a fair thing to criticize Tyrion for. Tyrion hasn't been in power all that long. How is he supposed to magically get Jaime free almost instantly? Tyrion explains that Jaime is likely in Riverrun, safe but under guard, until he can find a way to free him. Cersei expresses frustration, lamenting that if she had been a man, none of this would have happened, and questions how Jaime allowed himself to be captured. Like I've said so much in this chapter, This chapter really foreshadows Feast for Crows. This exact idea is something that we will talk about with Cersei for an entire book. This is one of her main things that she is kind of trying to be, is a man. And so it's interesting that George really sets up a lot of these things really early on for a book that's not really going to come out for, another, 10 years. Like, this Clash of Kings and Feast for Crows, I think, are separated by about 10 years. But he was already kind of planting those seeds for that book. She also questions where Tywin is and what he's doing now that he's wanted, accusing him of hiding behind the walls of Harrenhal. We've already talked about why he's doing that, but it's something that Cersei's not smart enough to understand. Tyrion defends their father, comparing the situation to a lion waiting for its prey, while the Stark forces are frozen with fear. Now, I wouldn't say, again, the Starks are fearful or anything like that, but he's trying to make Cersei feel better. And so I kind of think that they're just at a stalemate right now, where Tywin is playing, and Tywin has the benefit of the stalemate game works better for him than it does for Robb, at least in terms of the war going on up north. Cersei remains skeptical, wondering if their father is truly the lion, but Tyrion grins, joking that the lion was on their banners, but Cersei ignores the jest. Cersei argues that if their father were captured, Jaime wouldn't sit idly by, while Tyrion reflects on Jaime's boldness. While, yes, she is right, Jaime would do something rash like that, but it's things like that which is why he got captured. Tyrion suggests that not everyone can be as bold as Jaime, but that there are other ways to win wars, pointing out Harrenhal's strategic position. Again, Harrenhal is in the best position to react to the state of the war. Cersei counters with concern over King's Landing's vulnerability, especially with Renly approaching. Tyrion reassures her that Renly's march will not lead to the city's fall, describing a battle where their father's forces would strike from behind and crush Renly's. A lot more foreshadowing to what's going to occur with the Battle of the Blackwater, but I will say this. I disagree with that completely. If Renly gets to the city, the game's over. Regardless of what you want to say about Renly as a military leader or anything like that, Renly is still somebody that has people around him like Rhaenys Tarly that is a fine military commander, and they have overwhelming numbers to take not only King's Landing but to defeat Tywin as well. Cersei, still wary but seeking reassurance, asks what would happen if Robb Stark marches. Now, getting into page 243, it's an interesting question. What would occur if Robb were to march? But Tyrion explains that Harrenhal is strategically positioned to prevent Roose Bolton and his northern forces, again, that's where most of the foot soldiers are for Robb's campaign, from joining Robb's army. It would make it difficult for Stark to march on King's Landing without first taking Harrenhal. It'd also be stupid. It'd be extremely stupid for Robb to go to King's Landing instead of Harrenhal. Because if he did that, right, let's say Robb, Roose Bolton, they go south. At this point, you're now going to be trapped between the King's Landing force and also Harrenhal. You would put yourself at a massive disadvantage. You'd overstretch yourself from your supply lines and where your support is. It would be a very stupid maneuver. He reassures Cersei that their father is safe in the Riverlands, while their uncle Ser Safford gathers fresh levies at the Rock. Cersei, suspicious, questions how Tyrion knows all this, asking if their father shared his plans. And Tyrion responds that he simply looked at a map, which is true. If you just look at, you end off where Tyrion is in a Game of Thrones, all the information he knows from there, it's pretty obvious to tell what's going to happen, right? Unless something crazy happens, like unless Robb does what he does and goes into the west instead of trying to fight Tywin. It'd be pretty easy to understand the chessboard right now. Cersei scorns him, implying that he has invented this information himself. Tyrion counters this. If the Starks are in such a great position, why would they be suing for peace if the Lannisters weren't winning? Now, it's good rationale to convince Cersei. It doesn't really hold up to someone that's more rational than Cersei. Tyrion then produces a letter from Sir Cleos Frey explaining that the young wolf has sent peace terms, though they are unacceptable. Cersei eagerly asks to see the terms, returning to her queenly demeanor. Again, it shifts this, right? It takes it from this very personal conversation where they were originally talking about Tyrion sending Myrcella to Dorne and takes it to a completely different area. It now is allowed for Tyrion to get what he wants. Cersei has basically dropped the conversation. Tyrion has won. This is a beautiful way of Tyrion getting through this conversation, using other things to get what he wants to get done to happen. But this isn't the end of it. Tyrion, with a sly remark about the role of the hand, hands her the letter. While reflecting on his own bruised cheek, it was a small price for securing her consent to the Dornish marriage and gaining the knowledge of an informer. Now, Tyrion already thought Pycelle probably was an informer, but he now has concrete knowledge that he is. And so a great chapter because it pays off, Tyrion 5 in a really compelling way. It really updates us on the status of the city and the castle, the preparing, battle. And it also does a great job of preparing books in the future. It's a really great setup chapter that also has its own payoffs. I think the ending of the chapter with Tyrion outplaying and outsmarting Cersei is always fantastic. Builds up their dynamic a great amount. And so another great Tyrion chapter here in the middle. Well, I won't even say the middle of the book, but I would say, the first third of the book, kind of the getting into the middle of the book as we get to, Catelyn 2, I think Catelyn 2 is really where the middle of the book starts. Now, that's not the next chapter, but we will have Bran 3 in the next chapter, then Catelyn 2. Catelyn 2 is really where I think A Clash of Kings starts to hit its strides. It really starts to get to its peak. You have a bunch of different things happening at the same time, right? Catelyn with the Renly and Stannis plotline, Arya getting to Harrenhal, which is probably my favorite part of her arc in this book. The stuff at King's Landing starting to heat up with Tyrion and Cersei and all the stuff going on there. Jon starting to actually get into more of the interesting stuff at the Wall. So yeah, I'm really excited because we're getting into some of my favorite parts of A Clash of Kings, why it's my favorite book. And so I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.